Hi, this is Gail, and today I'd like to share a devotion I'm calling Answering a Rude Question About God. Now, I have to admit that I mostly get very nice questions and comments from my readers, but occasionally someone on social media will leave me a rude question. And the other day, someone responded to one of my devotions by saying, Why is a God who is all knowing and all powerful? Why would such a God create Satan? Now, he wasn't really interested in an answer. He was one of those people who kind of goes from blog post or social media post to just try to annoy people. But there are people who might genuinely ask that question, Christians, new Christians, or even older Christians who don't quite understand. And so it's important for us to understand how to answer those questions. First Peter 3:15 says, "Be prepared to answer questions about our faith." So let me give you some bullet points of how I would respond to this question if it was asked by someone who genuinely was wanting to know. Um, you may not use all of these bullet points, but I encourage you to look through them, be aware of them, and you can get an online post by just going to the description of this video. You'll see the link and you can click and go online where all those scriptures will be written down for you and where they're even linked to the scripture so you can click on them and read the full passage. So let me just go through some things that we could respond to a question like this. First off, God created Satan. It's true, but he created him good, and he gave him a choice. And Satan chose evil. Now, that's apparent in Isaiah 14:12 through 15, Ezekiel 28, 1 through 7. And I would encourage you to read the article that I've attached on the devotion online that talks more about Ezekiel 28. Secondly, God could have ended Satan's existence, but he chose to use Satan's stupidity and evil to test people and divide true believers from unbelievers. And we see an example of this in the book of Job. Job 1 1 through 12 tells us that God allowed Satan within limits to do to Job these things that really did confuse Job at first, but in the end strengthened his faith greatly. Another point is that God creates each of us and gives us a choice. We can choose good or evil. We're told this at the very beginning of Scripture when God talks to Cain in Genesis 4, 6, and 7. It's apparent in Joshua 24, 14 through 15, where Joshua says, "Choose this day who you will follow." It's also apparent in James 1, 14 and 15, and Revelation 3:20. Another point is that God is all knowing and all powerful, true, but he isn't all manipulative. He never tempts us, but he allows temptations in our lives because he wants us to make the real choice of following him. He doesn't want robots, so he doesn't force us to love him. He doesn't manipulate us to love him. He wants us to turn to him truly out of our own desire. This is apparent in James 1:13, James 1, 2 through 4, and 1 Corinthians 10:13. Another point is that anyone who rejects God is under Satan's control, even if they aren't involved in formal Satan worship. 2 Corinthians 4:4 tells us that Satan has blinded the minds of unbelievers. And it was apparent that this man who rudely asked me this question certainly had a blinded mind. He had not tried to understand God. So we do know that there's a choice involved in that as well, who we will follow. Next, because God is omniscient, knowing all things, he knows every detail of every life. He knows every detail of your life and my life. He won't send someone to hell by mistake, and he won't send someone to heaven by mistake. So we can trust that whatever he does is right and good. He knows if some people have merely an outward form of religion. That's in 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5. Next, because God is all powerful, he can do what he says he will do. Romans 1:20 explains this. We should be able to realize that God is able to do what he says. And most importantly, this last point, our God is not merely all-knowing and all-powerful. He's also completely loving, just, pure, ready to redeem and forgive and restore us. Read Psalm 103 for some of the beautiful ways that God does that. In fact, if this rude man who asked this question genuinely wanted to know God, God would redeem him. Our all-knowing, all-powerful God gives him a choice.